I pulled up to the house. My suitcase was standing next to me, the cream on my face already dried. The door opened. My mom looked at me and said, "You weren't on the guest list, were you?" I didn't say anything back. It was early morning. The sun was already burning. I thought the door was about to open. I was going to get a hug, and we were going on our long-awaited trip together. The door opened. My mom stood on the doorstep. No smile, no joy. Just a dry expression on her face. She said, "You knew you weren't on the guest list, didn't you? We figured you could handle it on your own." I remained silent. The words fell between us and froze in the air. They sounded mundane, like they were about forgotten groceries at the store. But this wasn't a shopping list. It was a list of people who were allowed to be around. I wasn't on it. I smiled. Briefly. Didn't respond. Turned around and walked to the car. The suitcase was back in the trunk. I started the engine and drove out of the yard. The house was behind me. The same facade, the same tile on the driveway, the same smell of lilacs. But nothing else in common. On the way, I thought back to past trips. I remembered how I had booked accommodation for everyone, how I had transferred money when someone suddenly didn't have enough, how I had negotiated the car rental. Always on the phone, always solving other people's problems. Back then, no one talked about the guest list. Back then, I was part of a construct called family. But in that construct, I was the bolt that held everything in place. Bolts aren't usually thanked. They're just used. By evening, the notice came. The bank. Request for payment $5,600. Your share for the flight and villa. I stared at the screen and felt no surprise. Only cold understanding. They were trying to use me again. Fly out without me but keep my wallet. The logic was simple, cynical, and painfully familiar. I opened the app. I transferred $1. In the comment field I wrote, "You're in for a surprise." The screen blinked and the transfer went through. The phone rang a few minutes later. Mom. I didn't answer. Then my sister. Then my brother. Mom again. They all left voicemails. I turned one on. Mother's voice was strained but polite. "Amelia, this isn't funny. You know this is a commitment. We paid for everything up front. You can't do this." I turned it off. That was enough. The messages came one after another. "You have to. It's your responsibility. We always do things together." Their words formed a chorus. It was as if three actors were reciting text from the same play. And not one of them thought about the fact that I wasn't playing the part anymore. I put the phone down. The house was quiet. On the table were papers and bills that I usually reached for first. Today I hadn't touched them. I sat in the dark, listened to the ticking of the clock, and felt strangely light. There was no resentment or hysteria inside. There was only one word. Enough. I opened my suitcase. I started moving things around. Slowly, methodically. It was like I was making a new pattern. Not for them. For myself. Each shirt, each folded dress lay down neatly, like the bricks of a new wall. There was a determination in every little thing that had been missing before. I was reminded of my childhood. The same scenes, only in a different package. When I was praised not for who I was but for helping others. For doing what no one else wanted to do. Back then it was called caring. Today it's called duty. But the point remains the same. The night passed quietly. I didn't toss and turn, didn't replay their words in my head. The morning greeted me with silence. The phone was flashing again. The screen was filled with demands and accusations. "You put money before family. We didn't expect this from you. You've always been cold." I didn't rush to answer. I just stared at the suitcase by the door. And for the first time in a long time I had a sense of control. I made myself a coffee, sat by the window, and opened the family chat room. Flicked upward. There were pictures of them, discussions about the details of the trip, jokes, emoticons. All of this had been written for weeks. Not one question about me. Not one attempt to ask how I was. But now they remembered. When the bill came. When they needed the money. I closed the chat room. I put my phone away. And looked out the window at the empty street. My life up to this point had always been at their disposal. Today, for the first time, I felt like I was in charge. I went to the kitchen and took out an old mug with a cracked handle, the same one I'd used to drink tea out of when I was a teenager. Back then, my mom used to say, "You should take care of things, they last longer than people." It sounded like a joke then. Today I hear the irony in it. Things do indeed last longer. Especially if the people around you don't think of you as a person but as a tool. I set the mug on the table and smiled. Quietly, without joy. I knew this was a day I would remember. Not because I'd been eliminated, but because for the first time I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just stopped being a part of their play. After coffee, I looked at my phone screen again. There were over 20 new messages. One of them was from my brother. Amelia, you don't understand. We're doing this for everyone. If you don't pay, we get hurt. You want the kids to go without food? I read and thought, I wonder how the kids will go without food in a villa for $10,000 for a week. I turned on the voicemail from my sister. She spoke quickly, choking on her words. I don't understand why you're like this. We're family. Is this what you do to your loved ones? We counted on you. You've always been there for us. Now you're turning your back on us? I stopped the tape in the middle. I knew it by heart. It was the old "You Always Helped" song. Yeah, I did. When I paid off her loan. When I bought her tickets because she didn't have a paycheck. When I babysat her kids while she had important meetings. I did. For years. And now she was surprised that I'd stopped. I went out into the yard. The air was thick, heavy. A neighbor was mowing his lawn, and the smell of fresh grass mixed with gasoline. I walked down the driveway and thought, this whole house, this town, this life has always revolved around making me comfortable. Comfortable for them. Today I was no longer comfortable. The phone vibrated again. My father's name on the screen. Rare. I answered it. His voice was low, tired, but accusing too. Amelia, I don't understand why you're making this so difficult. Is money more important than family? We've put up with you enough with all your weirdness. Now this. I didn't say a word. Then I said one word. I get it. And disconnected. That evening I pulled out an old photo album. Our past trips. Every picture showed me with my phone in my hands, my bag, my papers. Always on the move, always busy. The others are smiling. Relaxing. Drinking wine. I was never part of the fun in these photos. I was part of the logistics. Their invisible organizer. It seemed normal then. Today it looked absurd. I closed the album. I put it back in the drawer. And in that moment, I finally realized that what happened that morning at the door was no accident. It was the logical conclusion to something that had been going on all my life. I went to bed and for the first time in a long time I fell asleep without heavy thoughts. My phone kept blinking in the dark. I didn't turn its screen up. Let it blink. Let them write. Tomorrow would be a new day. And on that day, I would no longer be a resource for them. What happened next changed everything. Subscribe and stay. You don't want to miss how it unfolded. The next day, the first photos appeared on social networks. Airport. Suitcases. Smiles. Captions. A real vacation only with loved ones. I looked at the screen and realized I no longer existed in this story. I had been crossed off so easily, as if I had never been a part of their plans. The comments from friends were predictable. What a beautiful family. You guys are so friendly. Hundreds of likes. Not one noticed the absence. Or pretended not to notice. To them it looked like a complete picture. To me it looked like someone else's show. I put my phone down on the table and went to brew some coffee. The bitter taste was more honest than all those pictures. When I returned, the screen was already glowing with notifications. A new request. This time it was in the family chat room. Mom wrote, "We agreed to split the expenses equally. That's fair." The sister added, "No one should pull someone else's share. You are an adult, be responsible." The brother finished, "Amelia, don't be selfish. We all tried." Their messages came in a chain, as if lines from the same play. First the mother with an argument about fairness. Then the sister with a moralizing argument. And finally the brother with an accusation. A chorus in which the roles are predetermined. I read and thought, I wonder how many times they rehearsed this play. The phone rang in the evening. My brother first. I didn't answer. Then Mom. Then my sister. The voices on the answering machine sounded different, but the essence was the same. "Amelia, you know you can't do this. We did it for everyone's sake." The mother's voice was soft but irritated. "You're setting us up. It's your fault if something goes wrong," the brother said. If you don't feel sorry for your parents, at least feel sorry for your nephews. You're depriving them of a vacation, my sister added. I listened and felt a tired sarcasm rising inside. Depriving them of their vacation. It sounded like I'd turned off the sun or closed the beach. In a villa with a pool, the kids, it turned out, were at risk of being joyless because I hadn't paid for someone else's holiday. I turned off my phone, sat by the window. I watched the street get darker. The cars were thinning. The passers-by were hurrying home. I sat and thought, their arguments were always based on one thing: you have to. What does it matter what it's about? Tickets, loans, babysitting. It's always me. Always a duty. Never a request. Never a thank you. A letter from the travel agency came the next morning. Automated mailing. It listed everyone on the trip. My name was on the list. I was supposed to be part of the group. Ironically, I was technically on their contract. They cut me out in words but not on paper. On paper, I was still a source of payment. I reread the text of the letter several times. Especially the paragraph. Each participant is obligated to pay his share, regardless of actual participation. Black and white. The most cynical thing I could think of. I closed my laptop. I made a note in my notebook. The system considers me a participant. Family doesn't. In the evening, the pictures came again. The beach. Cocktails. Kids in the pool. The caption. Finally time just for us. I stared at the screen and felt strangely calm. Even laughed to myself. It's amazing how quickly I've gone from being an obligatory part of the family to a shadow that doesn't get mentioned. But shadows don't pay the bills. And in their logic, I'm still obligated. The messages went round and round again. You're putting money before family. You're being cold. We don't recognize you. Their favorite phrase, we don't recognize you, always meant one thing. You've stopped being comfortable. I didn't answer. But I did open the airline's website. No discussion, no notifications. Just selected a flight. I paid. Printed out the ticket. Everything seemed routine, almost businesslike. No drama. Just action. My phone kept blinking. But now I didn't feel annoyed anymore. I knew that every message from them confirmed only one thing. They were used to me always being there when they had to pay or decide. Habit was stronger than facts. They still thought they had the right to demand. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen. One word kept running through my head. Comfortable. I'd been convenient for them for years. Comfortable with expenses. Comfortable in caring. Comfortable in silence. Now I was no longer convenient. And that's what caused them to panic. I remembered an incident. A few years ago we rented a house by the sea. Then my brother forgot the map at home and went to the beach. My mom asked me to stay and wait for the plumber because you're in no hurry anyway. My sister left to go grocery shopping and returned 5 hours later with new earrings. I sat alone waiting for the handyman cleaning up after the kids. Then I ordered food for everyone because no one had thought of dinner. Then I smiled and kept quiet too. They didn't even notice. Now history was repeating itself, only on a different scale. I stood up, pulled out my suitcase and set it closer to the door. The phone vibrated again. A new message. Amelia, we've discussed and decided everything. You are obligated to pay your share. Don't let your family down. I read it and couldn't help the irony. Decided. Without me. But at my expense. Convenient logic. I turned off my phone. The suitcase was by the door. And I knew for the first time in a long time that things would be different from here. I went to bed early, but sleep was intermittent. At 3 in the morning, the phone lit up again. A new message from my sister. You're ruining the family. I stared at the screen and thought, how convenient to blame the destruction on someone who just stopped paying. The next morning I went to the store. Bought the groceries I usually bought for them. Coffee, bread, fruit. And I realized that this was the first time I'd ever gotten all this stuff just for me. No lists, no calls, no demands. There wasn't much in the basket. But it was enough. On the way home my mom called again. I picked up the phone. Her voice was full of reproach. Amelia, you're acting strange. You've always been reliable. What's wrong? Why are you like this all of a sudden? I answered calmly. Nothing happened. It's just enough. She was silent for a few seconds and then said, you disappoint us. I disconnected. In the evening, I opened the photo album again. On every trip, I was only in the frame when I was holding phones, documents, bags. In the pictures, I was a shadow. Everyone else was resting. I was working. It was the norm. No one even gave it a second thought. I went back to the kitchen, made tea, and sat by the window. Outside the window, cars were making noise, neighbors were grilling meat. Life was going on, and I could feel something changing inside. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a simple no. Not loud, not a bright one, but definitive. By midnight, the phone vibrated again. A new message from her brother. "You're going to cause a scandal. We won't be able to explain to our friends why you said no." I grinned. They cared more about what their friends would say than what was really going on. I wrote in my notebook, "They're afraid of other people's opinions. I'm not afraid anymore." The next 2 days went the same way. Notifications, calls, pictures. I didn't answer. The suitcase stood by the door. I was living my life, and for the first time it was mine alone. On the third day, I got another message from my mother. It was shorter than all the previous ones. "We hope you'll think it over and do the right thing." I read it and thought, for them, right always meant convenient for us. I put the phone down and smiled. For the first time, that phrase had lost its power. I took another sip of tea and looked at the suitcase by the door. It was waiting. I was waiting too, but not them. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Subscribe now to see the hero put everyone in their place. The plane landed softly. The lights in the cabin came on, and people started taking out their luggage. I sat quietly, in no hurry to get up. The suitcase stood next to me, containing everything I'd packed over the past few days. There was nothing unnecessary inside, just what belonged to me. The airport was greeted by humid air. I stepped out into the lounge and smelled the salt. Dozens of unread messages flashed on my phone screen, but I didn't open them. Everything I needed to do had already been done. A few hours later, the family posted pictures again. Sunset, pool, long table with champagne. The caption, "The best time is only with those closest to you." In the comments they wrote, "You are glowing with happiness." No one noticed the empty seat at the table. No one but me. That same day, a notification appeared in family chat. "The system has confirmed the participant entry on your reservation." My name was officially listed there. Panic set in immediately. The messages poured in one after another. "What does this mean? Why is your name here? What are you up to?" I didn't answer. At that moment, I was already in a cab. The palm trees outside the window replaced the concrete of the airport. I looked at the road and felt only one thing: calm. The cab pulled up to the hotel. I entered the lobby. The receptionist smiled and handed me the key. My room was ready. An envelope with a welcome letter was waiting on the counter. It was official. All by the book. Paperwork was fairer than family. In the evening, they gathered around the TV again. I knew this because I'd seen their picture a minute before. An image flashed on the screen. Me against the ocean, calm, smiling. The photo made its way into the hotel's feed. Their screams could be imagined without difficulty. The phone buzzed. The messages became hysterical. "You set us up. You did this on purpose to humiliate us. You're selfish." I opened the chat room and wrote one. "I paid my share. You got $1. The rest is my decision." I closed the chat room. I put my phone in the room safe. I never opened it again. The morning began with the sound of the waves. I made coffee and went out on the balcony. The ocean was calm. I sat and listened. My phone was silent. Messages must have come in, but now they were out of my day. I remembered all the conversations of the last few years. "You've always helped. You can't let us down. You have to." Those words echoed forever. They became the background music I lived by. But the music faded. I turned it off on my own. The day stretched on slowly. I walked along the beach, sat in the shade of palm trees. People around me were relaxing. I was relaxing for the first time in years. Without a to-do list, without other people's demands. And there was more freedom in this vacation than all the past trips combined. Messages from family came in droves. They changed in tone every minute. First it was accusatory, then pleading, then accusing again. I could only see the first lines. "You owe me an explanation. This is a betrayal. You've ruined everything. But I wasn't going to explain anything. In the evening, my mom called. I picked up the phone. There was silence for a few seconds, and then I heard her voice. Amelia, we're shocked. Why did you do that? We meant well. You could have just said you weren't going. But to make a show of it. I answered calmly. I didn't put on a show. I just made my choice. She stopped talking. There was more anger in her silence than in her words. Then she said, "You've always been ungrateful." I disconnected. I walked down the hotel corridor, went into the room. It was quiet. On the desk was an envelope with a schedule of guest activities. The paper looked more honest than anything they'd said in years. The paper recorded a fact. I am a participant. And the family's words recorded only their convenience. The next morning, my brother left a voicemail. His voice trembled. You have dishonored us. People will laugh. Why did you do that? I listened and thought, it all comes down to other people's opinions. They're afraid of being ridiculous. And they've always looked ridiculous. It's just that I used to close my eyes. I went to the beach. I sat down on a lounge chair. The sun was beating down on my face. The water shimmered. I felt like I was in the right place. No one demanded anything. No one said I was obligated. No one reminded me that I should always help. I remembered one trip. That was when my sister forgot the kids' passports. We were at the airport. I drove back across half the city while everyone else sat in a cafe. Then they posted a photo. The flight was a success. I wasn't in the photo. I was in the car. But I paid for the tickets. At the time it seemed like a small thing. Today it seemed like a pattern. The phone buzzed again. A new message from my sister. You're messing with us. You purposely chose to humiliate us. I looked at the screen and grinned. Humiliate? Just showing that I lived apart from their rules was enough. It was enough to make them feel humiliated. In the evening I sat on the balcony again, watching the lights of the waterfront. There was no joy or anger inside. Only silence. I finally felt I could be silent. And my silence was louder than any explanation. On the third day, their messages grew shorter. Call. Answer. You must. They were running out of words. They were running out of arguments. I turned my phone off and left it in the safe. Let it blink. I don't have to answer it anymore. I started waking up early. I'd go to the ocean at first light. I'd sit on the sand and watch the water rise and fall. People around me taking pictures, laughing. I just watched and breathed. I didn't have to prove anything. Messages from family became less frequent. My mom texted, "You'll realize someday that you've ruined everything." My sister sent a long text about me being insufferable and cold. My brother sent only one. "I pity you." I read all three and closed the chat. It was the last thing I saw from them. I walked down the promenade. Stores, music, the smell of coffee. I bought myself a hat. I used to always buy gifts for my family, come back with bags. Now I just bought one for myself. A small purchase. But it had more freedom than all the suitcases of souvenirs. In the evening I sat in the hotel restaurant. I ordered fish and a glass of wine. At neighboring tables tourists were laughing. I listened to their voices and felt that I was finally among people, not among demands. No one expected anything from me. No one demanded excuses. I remembered all the years of paying bills, solving problems, keeping quiet. They thought that was the norm. I thought it was the norm. But the norm was over. And now it was clear to everyone. Especially me. On the fourth day I turned off the phone for good. It was quiet inside. I sat on the balcony and looked at the horizon. The sun was setting, the sky was turning pink. I knew. Tomorrow they would write again, they would accuse again. But those words no longer carried weight. Their power rested only on my consent. And I withdrew it. I got up, closed the balcony door and turned off the light. The room was dark. I lay down and for the first time in years I felt a simple thing. I belonged to myself. And that was enough.